Welcome everyone! We all know some of the labels that top players get. For example, Mikhail Tal's always sacking pieces, Petrosian's always thinking about prophylaxis, and Capablanca just like to keep things simple and beat you in the endgame. Of course, great players can do everything really well, and so I've decided to also show games of players doing the opposite of what they're famous for. Today I'll start off with Capablanca, and in this game he's doing something slightly out of character. He's playing attacking chess. This is from 1935 and he played Soviet GM Grigory Levenfish. Capablanca had white and opens with d4, d5, c4, e6, and after knight to c3 and c6 we have the Semi-Slav defense. Now the game seems to start quietly at first. Knight to f3, knight f6, e3, knight bd7, all very normal. Bishop to d3. White can also delay that move to try to not lose a tempo like this, but the upside is that white now has two center pawns and black does not. Black's gaining space with tempo, intending bishop to b7 later on. Bishop d3, a6. That defends the b5 pawn, so now he's ready to counterattack white's center with c5, but it's at this point that Capablanca starts to spice things up. He advanced in the center with e4, and black has to play energetically to not get run over. Now this didn't happen, but if black would play a casual move like bishop to e7, then white pushes away black's knight, and after knight to d5, a trade. And now white can even play with h4, and white can either keep running the h-pawn up the board or go for moves like knight to g5 and bring the queen over. Meanwhile, black would only be very cramped and without any play. Going back, Levenfish knew that, and he was of course already planning to strike back with c5, and that's definitely the best move. Now e5 anyway, but black wisely doesn't move the knight, but takes on d4, counterattacking white's knight and removing one of white's strong center pawns. Both knights are now on prees, but Capablanca is still in the mood for the sharpest continuation. He played knight takes b5. Now it is possible to take on b5, and after pawn takes knight, actually take back with the pawn. That's maybe the most challenging for white. Kramnik and Anand played like this in their World Championship match in 2008. Instead, Levenfish played more quietly with knight takes e5, so he preferred to trade knights like this, and certainly that's also not bad. Now Capablanca could simply win his pawn back with bishop takes b5, but he's not in the mood for regaining pawns. He has his mind on the attack, so queen to f3 instead. After black's castled, he wants to go queen to h3, and by going for this move now, he gains time because the rook on a8 is attacked. Therefore, rook to a5. He could have first given a check with the bishop or the queen. Actually, he probably should have done that, but this is also playable. Now Capablanca castled, and even though white's a pawn down, I definitely prefer white, because his development is clearly better, the king is safe, and he could easily seize the initiative if black isn't careful. Levenfish went for b4, attacking the knight. Now white shouldn't try this fork because of bishop to b7, and now the queens will have to leave the board, and since Capablanca wants to attack, that's exactly what he doesn't want. So instead, bishop to f4 guarding the knight, bishop e7, rook from f to c1, taking the open file, and after castles, Capablanca starts to make some concrete threats. Here he went queen to h3. Now knight to c6 is a threat, because black cannot pin the knight to the queen anymore. To counter that, the simplest move is also black's best. Black should just put the bishop on b7, guarding c6 and completing development. But white can still try to complicate things with knight to g4, which has multiple threats. Taking on f6 and checkmating on h7 is one, or he can fork queen and rook with bishop to c7. However, only the first one is an actual threat. Remember, black is a pawn up, so losing the exchange doesn't have to be that bad. And that's not all. If after g6, white does go for the fork, then after queen to a8, bishop takes and queen takes, black has a pawn and bishop for the rook, but he also has the bishop pair, and without the dark squared bishop, white's attack on the king side doesn't really look like an attack anymore. Going back to the game, unfortunately, Levenfish starts to go wrong here. He wanted to block out white's rook with rook to c5, but already now, white can get a winning initiative, and Capablanca doesn't miss that chance. First a rook trade, and then bishop to g5 with the same threat as before. Take on f6 and checkmate. h6 takes care of that problem, but it does invite a bigger one. Now a great move by Capablanca. Knight to g4, piling up on the pinned knight. Of course, the bishop is untouchable because of knight takes with check, queen takes, and queen h7 mate. Instead, bishop to e7 was tried, unpinning the knight. Seemed so logical, but in fact black is dead lost now. Watch how Capablanca finished this off. First, bishop takes knight. Levenfish took back with the pawn, but let's also check bishop takes f6. Now there's this pleasing move, knight takes h6 check. Now the move no one would want to play, king to h8, even though this loses the queen, is actually black's best, because going back, pawn takes is a forced mate, queen takes threatens with mate on h7, so rook to e8, hoping to escape with the king, but then there's this familiar checkmating pattern, bishop h7 check, king to h8, and after bishop g6 double check, it's gonna be mate on f7. Going back to the game, Levenfish recaptured with the pawn, but everything loses at this point. Now, knight takes h6 check, king to g7, queen g4 check. Again, it's not a free piece, because it's a mate in 2. So, king to h8, only move. Queen to h5, Capablanca is sneaking in with the queen, preparing a deadly discovered check, so the king moved back. But as I said in the first Capablanca game I covered, Capablanca never missed a trick, and knight takes f7 is a nice one. Now he can use the g6 square. If rook takes would be played, it's again a mate in 2. Levenfish instead moved the rook out of the way, but after queen g6 check, he had no choice but to resign anyway. Why did he resign? After king to f8, it still ends quickly. Knight takes rook threatens with mate on f7, so queen to e8, but now a couple of checks. Queen h6, queen h7, and now knight to g6 check forces black to part with the queen, and then it's mate next move. Now, this was Capablanca in 1935, already beyond his prime, but I think you'll agree he simply crushed Levenfish. And Levenfish was one of the first players to ever get the GM title, so he wasn't a pushover. So it started out with this very concrete variation of the Semi-Slav. Levenfish didn't play the sharpest continuation, but what he did was also fine. It did go very wrong 6 moves later, when he went for this rook c5 move. Capablanca immediately put massive pressure on black's king side, and as soon as Capablanca opened up black's king, he wrapped things up very quickly. Now I actually have a bunch more nice attacking games of Capablanca. Obviously I'll show other players as well, but I'll definitely share more of Capa too. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you enjoyed, please simply like the video, do consider subscribing to the channel. More games are coming up this weekend, so I'll be seeing you guys again soon, and take care.